The Stanfords Travel Writers Festival goes to the ends of the earth now, with doctor, writer and wanderer Stephen Fabes talking with Paul Blezard.
Hello everybody, and a very warm welcome to this event, part of the Edward Stanfords Travel Writers Festival 2021, the wonderful, exciting digital edition, as due to COVID restrictions, of course, we cannot come to you from the hallowed halls of London's Olympia, which is a terrible shame, but we hope you're well, we hope you're keeping safe, we hope you're being careful, and I'm going to say this because it isn't political, it's just safe. We hope you're wearing a mask, social distancing, and washing your hands at least every half an hour while singing happy birthday twice, for those of you that may have forgotten that little tip that the government gave us earlier on this year. I'm delighted to have been asked to interview Stephen Fabes for this event for two reasons. One, he's a doctor, and who doesn't want to talk to a doctor right now? But two, because he's a fantastic long-range cyclist. In fact, I'll introduce him thus. Stephen Fabes is a medical doctor with a bad case of wanderlust and no sense of direction. Stephen finally found his way home in 2016 after cycling the length of 6 continents, an adventure using human stories into the landscape of health and disease. His writing has appeared in The Guardian, The Telegraph, CNN and the BBC, among others, and he's a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, an inspiring speaker and a regular at live storytelling nights. He is currently working in the emergency department at St Thomas's Hospital in London, and time off is for running trails. Signs of Life is his first book. It's been fantastically reviewed. And while he was doing his cycling, he ran a fantastic blog, which you can find on cyclingthe6.com. Stephen Fabes, a very warm welcome to the Edward Stanford Travel Writers Festival. It's nice to see you. How are you?
I'm very good. It's nice to see you. Thanks for having me on.
I know you can't talk about it much, but are you holding up? Because you're at the front line. You're one of the doctors. You're part of the NHS that we hear so much about. Are you looking after yourself? Are you being careful? Are you all right?
Yeah, I'm good. It's obviously, strange times. I mean, there's certainly, since I've been working in the last few months, there's been a huge emphasis on the well-being of staff, of doctors and nurses, and loads of companies throwing free food at A&E staff. So that's always good. I get to work and there's food from another bakery or another restaurant for us. So yeah, feeling really looked after, and I think it's quite a privilege to feel purposeful at the moment. And there's a good atmosphere at work. It's good.
Well, a grateful nation salutes you and your colleagues. I have loved this book. It's a fantastic book. I have done some long-range bike rides myself. I know the dynamic of it. So I read this with an absolute fascination. But I understand that your initial long-range international cycling experience started with your brother way back yonder when you headed to Chile. Tell us what took you there and how inspirational it was.
Yeah, I mean, that was a kind of the sort of adventure you have at that age, really, and that it was partly a disaster. And it was partly, this huge adventure that gave me this sort of sense of wanderlust, I guess. And I was 19, my brother was 17. We traveled to Chile, and our plan was to try and cycle the length of Chile from the south to the north. And we didn't really know what we were doing, and we couldn't fix bicycles. We couldn't. We hadn't had much experience out in the world, and it was just we had loads of problems. We ran out of food, we ran out of water. We had sort of fights. I remember one sort of fist fight we had in the middle of the desert, the Atacama Desert. So I think it was just one of those adventures you have when you're that age, maybe. And it's that ultimately went on to inspire this much longer journey around the world. I remember coming towards the end of that journey in the desert, and I knew that I was going to have to fly home fairly soon, and then sort of looking outwards and thinking about all the places further north of the Atacama and the mountains and the sort of the jungles of Colombia and the cloud forests, and then all the way up. If I could keep going, I could get to Alaska, this kind of wilderness patrolled by grizzly bears. And I just felt this real sense of possibility and this sense of excitement. And that was the seed of the idea, really, of around the world bike ride. It took me quite a long time to eventually go around to it. It was another 12 years or something until I left on my bicycle.
So it brings us to the 5th of January. Bring us to what led up to the 5th of January 2010. Obviously, long-range journeys like that when you're a teenager, when the world is full of possibilities, they are incredibly inspirational. And there's something I find about cycling which I don't get with long-range walking, which is the sense that you do get the ground traveling underneath you. You're still a part of it in the way that you're not when you're in a car or on public transport. So you get the same experience as if you're walking. You feel a part of the terrain through which you're traveling, but you're covering a lot more ground and you're not insulated from it. So what's made you think, hold on, I'd like to do this around the whole world? And can you talk to us about what planning went into it?
I mean, the other thing I was drawn to, so I was certainly drawn to that moving, my experience in Chile was that sort of moving very slowly and watching the world slowly sort of transform. And I really enjoyed the exertion and the sort of physical challenge of cycling. And I think also this sense of vulnerability that you're in quite wild places. You don't see many people in some parts of the Andes. And there was this sense that things could potentially go wrong, and then you'd have to kind of figure it out yourself, how to get out of that situation. So then, there is this sort of sense of vulnerability that I think that's, for me, is really the essence of a good adventure. So those things were sort of going through my mind when I got back from South America. And then I was working, I went to medical school in Liverpool, and then I worked for a while as a junior doctor. And I got a job in St Thomas's Hospital in sort of central London, where I'm actually working now again. But I did I was doing some medical training there. And there were kind of one part of me was really interested in because I loved my job, in sort of climbing the ladder and getting more responsibility, and that's what all my peers were doing. And there was another kind of slightly mischievous part of me, I suppose, that just wanted to blow up my life and go on an adventure. And memories of South America were sort of trickling back to me. And it came to a head about a couple of years before I left, when I went from work to the pub with a mini atlas. And surrounded by some friends, I explained, or I announced, that I was going to cycle around the world. My plan was to try and cycle the length of 6 continents. And I explained that this, not only would this be a great adventure, but probably be quite easy, because I've been on bike rides before, right? And I've been on bike rides that lasted a whole day. So if I just kind of did that again and again, I'd eventually get around the world. So that's kind of how it began. And then a couple of years after that, I was outside St Thomas's Hospital next to this fully loaded touring bicycle, ready to go.
For bicycle nerds such as me, what was the bike and what kit did you take? What were the essentials? Because of course the thing is, as I found to my cost, it's possible to overpack. And even if you apply the principle that if you can't carry it, you don't need it, you just think, well, if I can carry it, I can have it. And then you find up your first hill, actually, I've got far too much kit.
Yeah, I mean, I had way too much stuff at the beginning. It was ludicrous looking back on it, and it just sort of, I slowly got rid of it as I travelled. And I don't think I did any of the important things preparing for the journey. I certainly didn't do any physical preparation. I was completely unfit at this point, and hadn't done very much cycling in the 12 years in between. And so I was kind of unfit, I was a bit overweight. I was carrying far too much stuff, including like electronic weather meters and like all this kind of like bizarre things that I didn't need. So that definitely added to this sense. I had this sense of sort of excitement and confidence as I was heading off across the forecourt of the hospital. And by the time I got to Westminster Bridge, which is about 50 meters away, that all kind of evaporated. And I realized that I was unfit, I was overloaded, I've got no sense of direction, I can't fix bicycles. I had all these kind of like this sort of tsunami of self-doubt, really. So it was a slightly bumpy start, but completely my own fault.
So which direction were you heading on the first leg? Talk us through the route. Where were you heading for? What was the ambition?
My vague plan was to try and cycle the length of 6 continents. I didn't really plan the route in much detail. I think looking back, that was a good thing. I relished that sense of flexibility and sort of, changing my mind on a whim and just going off in one direction. But essentially it was London, Istanbul, and then Istanbul, Cairo, and then I tried to figure it out in between, and then Cairo, Cape Town. So that was the but basically it was I was planning to go across Europe, through the Middle East, then the length of Africa, and then my plan was to cycle the length of the Americas from the southern tip of South America all the way up to northern Alaska inside the Arctic Circle, and then my plan was to cycle across Australia, and then from sort of Singapore I would cycle home somehow. And I eventually I did that, but followed roughly the plan, I suppose. But there were some hiccups. There were some times where I had to take detours. I went via Mongolia on the way home, and had to, at one point, had to sort of fly backwards. So yeah, it was, and there was lots of sort of wiggles and things in between, because that's what I really enjoyed was getting off the main route and just doing these kind of loopy, sort of slightly wilder routes through on unpaved roads. And when I look back on the journey now, many of my favorite memories are from those little mini adventures.
They're the ones that one always remembers. So talk us through, what was it like cycling across Europe? Because I know each country seems to have very different flavour. We know what the roads are like in here in the UK, and anybody who's cycled across the Channel suddenly is glories in the quality of the bitumen of the tarmac in France, and how motorists will give you much more space than they ever do here in Britain. And then Spain's another thing entirely, and Germany's fantastic to cycle through. Poland just goes on forever, but the roads are really lovely if you're on a road. Talk us through your experience.
Well, across Europe twice, of course, on my way out and on my way back. So right at the end, on my way out, it was a fairly miserable experience, actually. Although people looked after me and certainly bought breakfast sometimes and things like that. And I was staying sometimes with cyclists through sort of travel networking websites. But the temperature, it was the cold. I left during the coldest European winter for 31 years, and I left right in the heart of it. So I hadn't planned that at the beginning very, very well, and that was. I remember leaving the UK. I was just sort of attacked by these groups of gangs of children with snowballs, and then I got into France, and the whole country was snow covered, really, right until I got down to the south. And I didn't really have the right cold weather gear, and I was probably a bit of a soft, city living boy at that point. So I wasn't prepared, and it was a struggle. I'll be honest, it was a struggle until I got over the Alps and then into Eastern Europe, and things got a little bit better then. But then, unfortunately, I had a problem with my left knee, which required surgery in the end. So that's the only time I returned home, was from right at the beginning of the journey. And I came home and had to have surgery on my knee, which was really devastating, because I told everyone I was going to cycle around the world for a long time, and I had to come home after only a few months with my tail between my legs a bit. But
yes, you write about it rather poignantly. There's an aspect of this, and I'm still unclear as to whether it was part of the plan or whether it happened, about visiting remote medical projects and hospitals along the way. Was that always part of the plan?
I had a very vague idea of visiting a project in Kenya when I left. I was raising money for an NGO at the time, and I thought that might be possible, but no, it wasn't the plan, really. That was just a kind of one-off thing. And then actually, as the trip progressed, I became much more interested in visiting these projects. I think, first of all, it was I missed my job. I was interested. I was curious about healthcare in other places. And then as I was traveling, I was doing a bit of medical journalism as well. So it's something I thought I could write about. But I think, as well, as you're cycling, you get a very kind of rosy view of the world. People are very kind to you, lots of hospitality all the time from people, places to stay and food. And I began to get a sense that I wasn't really getting under the surface of places, really. And that's simply because I didn't have the language, I didn't have the time to get to the heart of things. But as I traveled, I thought maybe I could visit some medical projects. I get to understand a little bit more about some of the things so some of the things going on in the places that I'm traveling through, and some of the sort of social and political forces at work, maybe in very much the same way as I think that working in the NHS has given me a different perspective on London, because you're hearing people's stories all the time, and I think it is a very privileged perspective, and you do start to understand a bit more about some of the social and political forces at work. So it gives you a different angle on things, and that's what I was looking for, I suppose, as I was traveling as well.
It also makes for some lovely stories. There's some fantastic incidents in this book that come through, you visiting health clinics, visiting some of the medical projects. Let's talk about the joy. Can we talk a little bit about the joy of it? Because, as anybody who's done long range bike rides or any long voyage knows, largely it's just the grunt of putting one foot in front of another, fixing punctures, trying not to get ridden off the road and so on. And it's easy to focus on those. And in the moment, those are the things that drive us mad. Am I actually going to be able to finish this journey? What the hell have I done? Can you talk us through when you started to, the giggle-worthy moments, when it feels like you're flying, when you and the bicycle are of all of one piece? There's a lovely anecdote somewhere in the book, I can't remember. It's a few days since I read it, forgive me. But you say that you've gone shopping. I think this was after the route, and you're twisting the handle of the shopping trolley as if you're trying to change gears as you go around the supermarket. And I love that sort of, the cycling becomes second nature after a while.
Yeah, that's right. That was I'd got back to the UK, and I was cycling back towards London. So I'd been away just over 6 years, and I was in Sainsbury's, and I felt my left hand tighten and rotate around the handle, and I realised I was trying to change gear on the shopping trolley. So yeah, I did get pretty used to it. I mean, there were lots of exciting things that happened, and lots of interesting characters I met along the way. But the reality of some of it was just trying to get through. Sometimes these long, tedious days were very windy and where not very much happens, and you have to try and keep yourself entertained. And that was certainly true in places like Patagonia, where you're kind of on these windswept, rocky plains. But there were lots of great moments as well when you've got a strong tailwind behind you and you're just blasting through the miles without really trying, and then all these little chance encounters and these small acts of charity that you're often sort of subjected to as a traveling cyclist. One of the things I really enjoyed about it, and I think just being in these wilder places, and that was really my method, really, was to try and get off the main roads as much as possible, even if that took longer, even if it was harder cycling, sometimes unpaved roads, higher average gradients than the Tour de France, and you'd be going uphill for 3 days or something, and the weather would be awful. But I just felt, again, that sense of vulnerability that I felt in Chile, and I felt very much alive in those moments. So that's how I did it, I guess.
You talk us through some of the acts of kindness and whether there are national differences. You don't have to talk to many travellers or to have done much travelling oneself, whether you're Simon Reeve or Sir Ralph Fiennes or Kenton Cool, to realise that actually the joy of travelling are the people you meet along the way. It's about the geography and it's about the people, and how that works reflects on a conversation I had with Michael Wood, the historian, yesterday, in his travels through China. And he's saying it's about the people, it's about the hospitality that you're offered, it's about the kindnesses that you are shown, and actually that connection that we are all part of the same species and we are dependent upon each other.
Yeah, certainly that was my sort of great take-home messages of the trip. Really, was this idea that we're all hopelessly and intimately connected, and generally that's a good thing. I suppose you could argue things like COVID suggest that it's not always a good thing, the fact that we're all so connected. But I think I do think that we're going to get through this together. And I think the other thing that I took away was this fact that we're all quite similar to each other as well, in ways sometimes we don't want to admit. And it can sound quite trite when you say that, but I don't really apologize for it. I don't think it can be overstated in the current political climate that we are very, very much similar. And I was reminded of that constantly as I traveled in lots of sort of silly and amusing ways. But it was that was something I one of my sort of fondest take-home messages, I guess, from the journey.
Let's talk about a specific region. For example, let's talk about Mongolia, or Mongolia and China, cycling through sort of East Asia. Very different culture, very different cuisine, very different geography, very different mindset. How did that work? Tell us your memories and reminiscences of that.
Yeah, difficult. You feel completely lost in that environment when you can't read the signs, can't order food. You just feel like a sort of, you don't have any of these sort of what you'd assume would be your normal capabilities. You feel like a bit of, you just constantly lost, and a bit like a child sometimes, where you're completely out of your depth. I remember in China teaming up with another cyclist called Lian, he was a friend, of course, and someone it was great to meet, but he kind of turned into my sort of guide in food and language, and all these, and a bit of a navigator as well. So he kind of like predictably kind of morphed into that, and I felt so grateful that I had someone who was able to understand things a bit more than I could. And we had loads of like there were lots of little miscommunications between us. He had a bit of English, but very little, and so he'd use his phone to sort of type messages in, and then he would show me the screen to translate it into English and show me the screen. And I remember him, some of them were very like sort of archaic English. So he'd show me the screen and it said, "We are kinsmen," and things like that, which I thought was quite sweet. And then he would, at one point, he said it was too cold for the praetorium. And I had to think for a minute, what did he mean? A praetorium is a general's tent within a Roman encampment. And I think he was obviously referring to my tent, which I thought was quite nice as well. But there were all these like little miscommunications and things, and it was that part of the world was particularly tricky. I took a few months getting across China and up to Mongolia, and sometimes it was a real struggle, but with people like Lian, it was much easier.
What kept you going? Because it's any physical endeavor, it's largely mind over matter, especially if it's endurance. If it's speed or endurance, it's pretty much mind over physicality. What kept you going in your head? What kept you going forward, other than a willingness not to fail? The fact, of course, that you've told everybody that you're going to offer and that you're going to do the challenge, but it's a challenge for yourself as much as anybody. And there are dark days, especially when you're low on blood sugar, your limbs are aching, everything's sore, bits of your kit are beginning to either run out, wear out, or break down, and all looks bleak. What kept you pushing forward?
Two things really, or maybe three things I should say. But I think that certainly like friends joining me for sections of the route, it was great, because you start to really crave some sense of familiarity when you've been on your own for a very long time through in foreign countries, and anybody from home who comes to visit is just, it can feel like such a relief, and that made things much easier. So that happened a number of times as I was traveled. Sometimes a friend would join me for a month. The other thing was, I think I mentioned before, the visiting of these medical projects. It gave me I was quite burnt out after I'd been traveling 3 or 4 years, I think, by the time I got to Southeast Asia, and I was very much looking for a fresh sense of purpose, I guess. And I was enjoying the adventure of traveling by bicycle, but I wasn't really feeling like I was getting under the surface sometimes. And these medical projects, they reminded me about how much I missed my own profession, but they were also I was able to kind of think about the environment that I was traveling through in a little bit more depth. I was able to get a bit more understanding, and I was able to meet medical professionals working in different places. So I visited a wide range of projects as I traveled, and that included sanatoriums for patients with TB in the Caucasus, to hospitals for patients with leprosy in Nepal, to mental health rehab in Mumbai, to an orthopedic ward in Afghanistan, to floating medical clinics in Cambodia, and lots of different projects. And I began writing more and more as I traveled as well. I was doing some freelance journalism. So I suppose the writing and the visiting medical projects sort of invested my journey in a little bit more purpose. And that helped me, certainly as I was getting towards the end of the journey.
What struck me about the range, as you just described now, of the medical projects you visited, and the range of illnesses and conditions that you were seeing, how has that informed how you now work as in A&E, in an emergency department here in the UK? Because you now have a breadth and depth of experience which is truly international and truly global, which must be very valuable in your day job now, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think so, because it certainly makes you think about some of the factors that influence health in a way that maybe I hadn't thought of before, and it's incredibly complicated. I remember visiting this mobile medical project in Turkana, which is this very remote part of Kenya, and often I think in those resource poor settings, you're inclined to think that the poverty is underlying the poor health of the people who live there, and that's certainly true to a large degree. But what I found traveling through that region in particular was that there were a number of different factors and forces at work, things that I might not have considered. So in that area, they were in the middle of a very severe drought. There was potentially the impact of climate change, of conflict between different groups in the region, of the foreign money building these dams on the river, which led to water shortages. Yeah, and so there are lots of different factors at work. So I think that I've taken that home with me, really. So then when I'm thinking about healthcare in London, you start to think a bit more deeply about some of the things that might be impacting health. I think we've been reminded about that with COVID as well, some of the underlying inequalities that COVID has kind of brought to the surface or shined a light on. And I think also being a writer has helped me as well, because I find writing encourages you to question things, and it's quite a cathartic process as well. So I think as a doctor, writing is something that I came home as a writer, I suppose, and I think that's something that really helped me in my career.
Absolutely. Stephen, you very kindly have accepted my invitation to read a piece for the Stanfords Travel Writers Festival, and I have this fascination with author's own words in author's own voice. Perhaps you'd like to talk us into it and read for us, please, if you'd be so kind.
So I'm going to read a very short piece about wild camping, and wild camping was something that I was really very much entwined in this event. I was going to say I was cycling around the world, but yeah, I was definitely doing a lot of wild camping. I spent about more than 1,000 nights by roadsides, and I love it. And this is, I suppose, a passage about some of the thrill, I suppose, of wild camping and how it can sometimes get you into trouble. So the next day I continued west, and by nightfall near Pahan, I was ducking behind some bushes to conceal my campsite. Inside my tent, I could hear men's voices. They came and went and popped up close by. Footfall, 2 slow, determined steps, psychopathic steps. All went quiet again until a dog stalked over, a Doberman probably, rabid and toothy, with yellow eyes. It had just the bark. This primal sense of dread was one of the many reasons I'd fallen in love with camping stealthily on the edge of towns. Sleeping in this liminal space can feel as heady as camping in the wild, especially when it's against the law, as it was in Myanmar. There was a feeling during these nightly detours of stalking society. It felt thrillingly outsiderish. I was the thief at the window, childishly fun, like a game of hide and seek. I was rough sleeping around the world as much as cycling around it. Both defined my journey. Usually, it was easy enough to find a patch of earth to call my own, but I fancied myself an expert now. To dodge detection, I was strategic. Camping high beats camping low, for instance. People look down at things more often than up at them. Pitching your tent is best done on the cusp of darkness too, when you can evaluate your campsite before night falls and hides you away. Camp too early and you risk getting spotted. This is worse than it sounds. In sleepy villages all over the world, your news. One curious soul will multiply to 20. Between 8 and 10 of them will be content to watch you sleep. Camp too late when it's dark, and you'll inevitably wake up the next morning beside a sign saying something like, "Warning, mine clearance in progress." Of all the nights I'd spent hiding away in my tent, most had been lost to memory. There are a few I recalled as glorious victories. The Jordanian cliff top, the Californian sea cave, the center of a French roundabout, the ramparts of a ruined Ottoman castle. Others I remembered as stonking defeats, and I'd catalogued these as if they were dated horror movies. The night of the fire ants, El Salvador, the dawn of the scorpion under my thermarest, Argentina, and the midnight of the flood, Australia. On this occasion, when the footfalls turned out to be a few wandering kids and not an axe-wielding sociopath, there was a sense of escape that washed away all the fear and seemed to make the whole process ecstatically worth it.
Beautifully read and wonderfully written, Stephen. Night of the Fire Ants. In fact, all three of those would make fantastic sort of B-movie horror film titles, wouldn't they? Were you afraid at any stage? Can you talk us through fear? You mentioned fear in there. We tend to think of the rest of the world as being other. And if we, in a world of rolling news media, when we see nothing but fear, horror, war, deprivation, poverty, all we hear is threat, 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 threat. And of course, you don't have to travel very far or for very long to realize the world is not like that.
Yeah, that's right. I think otherness is very much bound up in travel. We travel to experience other cultures, other landscapes, other food, all that kind of stuff, and that's that. But I think as my journey progressed, anyway, I became more interested in similarities, and that's part of and parallels, and I think that's part of what inspired me to visit some of these health projects as well. But in terms of being afraid. Yeah, I mean, plenty of times. I think often when I was rough camping, and I had a particularly frightening experience in Peru, where a guy, I was camping by this sort of small hut in the middle of nowhere, which I thought was derelict, and my tent had some holes in it, so I managed to put my tent right next to this hut because the edge of the roof just covered it. I thought I'd get a bit of shelter, and I went to bed. And in the early hours, I heard some footsteps outside my tent in much the same way as I was describing in that passage, when you're sort of frozen, paralyzed, wondering who's outside. And then the footfall became so close, I realized that I'd been discovered. So I looked outside, and I could see this sort of shadow of a figure, sort of silhouette that then started marching quite quickly towards me. And then this grubby face appeared in my tent porch, and then I realized that he was holding something in his hand, and it looked like a gun. And then he lifted it, and I was sort of staring at this black pistol, and he said, "Afuera, just get out." And it happened very quickly, and I just kind of scrambled out of my tent, and he sort of held me at gunpoint, really, and then marched me inside what turned out to be his home, which was this small, what I thought was a derelict building. And I spoke a little bit of Spanish, so I was just kind of babbling, and I was explaining that I was a tourist, etc. And eventually he calmed down, and he said, "¿Quieres sopa? Do you want some soup?" And I didn't really know where this was going, but I kind of, said, "Yeah." And then he offered me chicken or tomato, and we were sat down then eating soup together. And he told me how he'd been scared of me. Men with guns had come to his home before, and so he bought his own gun as protection, and he'd been mining gold illegally, which is why he was out later at night. So yeah, again, a lot of the time I think it was important in that situation not to react straight away and try to I don't think if you if you react badly in that circumstance, there's no going back really. So that is a one-way street. So you have to be quite calm, you have to be quite diplomatic. And most of the times where I got into trouble was generally, it was more of a misunderstanding than anything else. But as I said, yeah, spent more than 1,000 nights by roadsides and very few problems in that time. I think my other really experience of being afraid was coming into Afghanistan, and lots of military checkpoints, lots of warnings about Taliban, and yeah, there was some pretty hairy times there. But I didn't try to cross the country, and I came back in the way that I'd got in, and I was treated by and large extremely kindly by the people I met there.
Nicely told. Tell us how you spent your 30th birthday.
My 30th birthday was in Syria. I was cycling along, feeling probably a bit sorry for myself when the family, or a couple of guys, Tarek and Mustafa, kind of hailed me and brought me in, and we sat in the shade and drank some tea, and then got talking, and they found out it was my birthday, and they threw me this kind of birthday party basically in this small village, which I can't even remember the name of now, somewhere between Aleppo and Homs. And it was an incredible memory, I think, especially because we didn't realize, of course, no one did, that Syria was on such a precipice at the time, and it descended into conflict quite soon after I'd left. And so I often look back at the photos of Tarek and Mustafa, Mustafa offering me like 3 kilograms of meat to take away on my bicycle at the end, which was not a very practical gift, but they really looked after me.
You had a good birthday. It sort of brought me to tears, the kindness that you were shown. Can we talk a little bit about kit and kit failures? What did you, if you were to go again, what's the one piece of kit that you would think just not worth it? Seemed like a good idea all the time, of weather radar or weather thing not included. And equally, what's the piece of kit that you took that proved to be unexpectedly invaluable?
I mean, there was just so much kit that I didn't need. It's really hard to actually decide on one particular, because there was like vast amounts. But I did meet other cyclists that were more overloaded than me on occasion. I remember this one guy coming over a hill in Canada who was carrying a sitar, a mandolin, and a didgeridoo on his back of his bicycle. And this kind of orchestra was making his day pretty difficult, I think. But what didn't I need? I probably had, I mean, I often had quite a few books, which were I really needed books. I read a lot, but I probably would, if I was going away now, would have some sort of e-reader or something like that. And in terms of the stuff that I found unexpectedly valuable, and a thermos was a really good thing to have. So make some tea in the morning. It's in the cold countries, cycling into Alaska in the Arctic Circle, cycling across Mongolia in the wintertime, which was a different degree of cold, really. I mean, we talk like -40 at night time, lakes were all frozen, that was tough. So yeah, a thermos flask to keep me warm as I cycled. Equally, in hot countries, I'd have one of those like water spray things that they have in hairdressers, and I'd just pop myself in the face every so often, and that was fantastic. And in terms of sort of safety and things, I felt that a side mirror on my bicycle was a really useful way of helping my own safety, because I was able there to control how vehicles passed me. If I didn't think that I was going to be given enough room, then and I could move slightly into the road at the right time, not too late, and that would encourage people to think me an incompetent cyclist, and therefore give me a little bit more room. It's called the safety shuffle, and it works a treat. But sometimes, some parts of the world, that was just really necessary because the roads were really dangerous.
Nicely put up. Yeah, the safety stuff. Good about that. Can you talk us through high altitude cycling? Because of course, you can't do a sort of around the world tour without crossing mountains, and bicycles and high altitude and physical exercise, especially with heavy loads, are often tricky, as you write.
Yeah, the Andes especially, I would be going from sea level to 5,000 meters above sea level in a continuous ascent. And that would be, that might take a few days. I'd be on unpaved roads, very steep gradients, 40 kilograms of kit, 20 kilograms of bike, and it'd be really, it'd be really difficult, hard going, but always worth it, because I felt that in that mountain environment, I think the Andes perhaps probably the best place for cycle touring in the world. It was just a really thrilling place to ride, very, very beautiful mountain range, and lots of roads, so you can kind of get off the beaten track. You can get off on these like small mountain passes, and I actually zigzagged my way up through South America. I think I crossed the Andes 10 times on my way just through Chile and Argentina. Yeah, I mean, I did get altitude sickness. I mean, I wasn't at any super high altitudes, obviously, but it was. I think when you're working hard at 5,000 meters with a heavy bicycle, and you do, when you're exerting yourself, then you do suffer altitude sickness and you get insomnia and things at night time. Yeah, it's hard,
especially when you're going through a fairly dry patch, a dry area, and you have to carry all your food and all your water. And obviously with physical exercise, that requires quite a lot. Final question really for me. We're running out of time, sadly, although I feel I could talk to you forever. What bike were you on? How did you choose it? And would you do it again?
It was a good bike. It was an expensive one. I think at the time it was sort of custom built. It was a Santos Travel Master. It's a Dutch brand that specialize in these touring bicycles, steel frame, with a roll-off hub, so all the gears are internal, which I broke a number of, but they were very good. They posted me new ones out to quite remote places if I needed them. I'm an awful mechanic. I don't really understand about bicycles. I don't really care much about bicycles either, to be honest. Like, I like the what they offer me as a traveller, but I don't really get a kick out of fixing them, and often would hand that task to someone far more proficient than I am.
Did you not have willing helpers amongst them? Was it Egyptian secret police or something helping you fix a puncture? Have I misremembered that?
Yeah, the police would follow me in Egypt, and they would certainly help if things went wrong. Yeah, that was great. And but people in lots of different places were just way better than I was, and they could very, very easily improvise if they didn't have the right kit. So I was helped out frequently. And would I do it again? No. I think I've kind of got some of that wanderlust out of my system, and I write about I dedicate a whole chapter to, or more than a chapter, I think, to the experience of coming home at the end of the journey, because I think that's a really important thing to write to go into, because I've been away for more than 6 years, and I was really excited actually about being part of a community and having a sense of purpose, and feeling like I'm not just observing, I'm kind of participating in some way. And as I said, I really love my job, and it felt great to go back into that. And it's difficult at the moment, but it is a real privilege to have that sense of purpose, and to be working in a team of people that are everyone's doing their best at the moment in a difficult situation. So no, I don't think I'd do it again, but I do still have that sense of adventure, of course. And my way of getting that out of my system is running. I do a lot of trail running, especially, and marathons and ultra marathons and things. And that for me is a great kind of, release.
Good for you. One last question for me. I'm sorry, I meant to ask this earlier, because you mentioned iced lakes. And I can hear people thinking, hold on, how the hell, with a heavily laden bicycle, panniers over your front axle, panniers over your rear axle, how the hell do you cycle over an ice lake?
Badly. I mean, you fall off a lot. I had spiked ice tires that my mum very kindly posted me out. She's my one-woman support team, and they didn't do a great job. I think you really need a sort of fat bike to be on this. But I cycled across this lake called Hovskol in the north of Mongolia at winter time, very close to the border with Siberia, -40 at night time. And I camped on the ice as well. And you could hear the ice popping and cracking all night. It was an incredible experience. But cycling across the lake was as well. And I fell down a number of times, but yeah, the ice is so thick. There's no chance of falling into the lake. It's more than a meter thick. It's too cold, So it was great, but you do need probably a different kind of bicycle than the one that I had.
There's a marvelous thing if you're sleeping on ice. I've only done it a couple of times, but there's that terror of you hear the ping as the temperature differential in the ice makes the ice crack and it reverberates around the whole thing. It's a fantastic sort of futuristic sound, but also slightly terrifying, I find. Have you found the same thing?
Yeah, the sounds the ice made were just incredible. You'd hear cracks and pops and clicks, and then sometimes you'd hear a sort of bubbling sound, which is like water coming up through the fresh cracks in the sort of underbelly of ice. So it was frightening, definitely, but good. But I won't forget it.
Definitely frightening. Stephen, thank you so much for giving up the time to come and join us here at the Edward Stanford Travel Writers Festival. It's been an absolute dream to talk to you. Congratulations on your book. I was trying to find some cover blurbs or some reviews for it. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to dig any up. But if you ever do a second edition and you want cover blurb or reviews, just let me know, because I'm a huge fan of this. It's called Signs of Life. Let me show you. It's written by, here we go, Dr. Stephen Fabes. It says at the back, they say that being a good doctor boils down to just 4 things: shut up, listen, know something, care. The same could be said for life on the road too. Dr. Stephen Fabes, thank you very, very much for joining us, and good luck over the weeks and months ahead to you and your colleagues at St. Thomas's and, of course, emergency departments around the UK. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Well, we've all woken up in the middle of the night convinced our wardrobe's actually a person sent to kill us, but it must be terrifying having an actual gun thrust inside your tent. Mind you, my wardrobe's never made me soup. What a calming presence. Thank you, Stephen and Paul. Well, if after all that you've got ants in your pants, then take a ride with Signs of Life to the ends of the earth with a doctor. Available to buy now at stanfords.co.uk.